short-term spending bill that would fund the government through the end of the fiscal year in September. The House is voting on the measure this afternoon. If it passes through the lower chamber, the Senate likely will begin consideration of the measure later today. And now live to the floor of the U.S. Senate here on C-SPAN 2.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Eternal God, our hearts are steadfast toward you. Lead us safely to the refuge of your choosing, for you desire to give us a future and a hope. Today, give our senators the power to do your will as they realize more fully that they are servants of heaven and stewards of your mysteries. May faithfulness be the litmus test by which they evaluate each action. May they never be careless about their spiritual and moral growth as you make them your instruments for achieving lasting peace and justice in troublesome times. We pray in your sacred name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., January 15, 2014. To the Senate. Under provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Edward J. Markey, a senator from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, to perform the duties of the Chair, Son Patrick J. Leahy, President pro tempore.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
President, I would ask unanimous consent to call the quorum be terminated.
Without objection.
I move to proceed to calendar 266.
The clerk will report the measure.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 266, S-1846, a bill to delay the implementation of certain provisions of the Biggert Waters Flood Insurance Reform Act of 2012 and for other purposes.
Mr. President, on this issue, we have a bipartisan coalition that badly wants to get this done. And so we're going to do everything we can to move forward on this. At this stage, the Republicans have not cleared the proposed consent agreement. I've indicated to the Republican leader that later today I would ask that. But also, to stopgap, we have started the Rule 14 procedure, which just in a minute I'll move to that, and we'll have the second reading. So if we can't work anything out on a consent agreement, we'll tee this up. So this will be the first vote we have when we get back after our recess.
Majority Leader, yield for an observation. Yeah, the Majority Leader is correct. There's substantial bipartisan support for the flood insurance bill. We're not in a position to clear it yet, but Senator Isaacson, who is taking the lead on this issue on our side, is working with our members, and hopefully we'll be able to figure out a way forward here in the not too distant future.
And on our side, Senator Landrieu has been persistent for months now, and so she and Senator Isaacson, I hope we can work something out so we can maybe work on this before we leave here. Mr. President, following my remarks and those of the Republican leader, the time until noon will be equally divided and controlled between the two of us or our designees. At noon, the Senate will begin consideration of H.A. Res. 106, which is the short-term continuing resolution. At 12:15, there will be a roll call vote on the joint resolution. And just before coming here, I was told the vote in the House will be between 3 and 5 o'clock this afternoon, so we should get that at a reasonable hour today. We expect to begin consideration of the omnibus bill when it's received in the House, as I've indicated later today. Mr. President, there are two bills at the desk due for second readings.
The clerk will read the titles of the bill for a second time.
S. 1917, a bill to provide for additional enhancements of the sexual assault prevention and response activities of the armed forces. S. 1926, a bill to delay the implementation of certain provisions of the Biggert-Waters Flood Insurance Reform Act of 2012 and to reform the National Association of Registered Agents and Brokers, and for other purposes.
Mr. President, I would object to further proceeding to either one of these matters at this time.
Objection is heard.
The objection is heard. The bills will be placed on the calendar.
Mr. President, last night's vote to block emergency unemployment insurance was, I'm sorry to say, what goes on and has for a number of years here, it's blocked by the Republicans. It's really a tragedy for millions of Americans who are relying on Congress to help them get through these hard times. Today's long-term employment is double what it was at any other time Congress has allowed emergency benefits to lapse. And yet Republicans refuse to even allow an up or down vote on a plan to restore benefits to 1.5 million Americans and their 2.3 million children. I thought we had satisfied every complaint and demand my Republican colleagues made throughout the week. They said they wouldn't vote on extension, which would provide an average of $300 a week to families struggling to get by unless a bill was paid for. So we proposed an offset that wasn't unique for us. It was originally proposed by Congressman Paul Ryan, chairman of the Budget Committee in the House, and the Republicans' candidate for vice president in the last election. Then Republicans said they couldn't vote for an extension of unemployment insurance without reforms to the programs. We also did that. What we did would prevent double dipping and reduce the number of weeks recipients could receive unemployment benefits. Then Republicans said they couldn't vote to extend unemployment benefits unless they were allowed to offer amendments. So Democrats agreed to vote on up to 20 amendments, 10 on each side. They again refused. So, Mr. President, unless Democrats agreed to vote on an unlimited number of unrelated, irrelevant Republican amendments, the minority would filibuster the bill to help people who've been looking for work for a long, long time. This callous vote yesterday proves that Republicans wanted to seem like they supported an extension of unemployment insurance, even though they didn't vote and wouldn't vote for an extension. The minority hid behind one process argument after another as they voted and a program that has been successful for millions of Americans, including, I indicate, more than 500,000 children. It's kept them out of poverty in recent years. Middle-class Americans can see right through these flimsy Republican excuses. And they see last night's vote for what it was, a slap in the face to almost 1.5 million Americans, including tens of thousands of veterans. A slap in the face for 18,000 Nevadans who are still looking for work, and 2.3 million children whose parents don't have jobs. And a slap in the face for 70,000 more people who will lose their unemployment benefits each week until Congress acts. But the fight is not over, Mr. President. We're not going to give up on Americans struggling to get back on their feet. We're working on other proposals. We can move forward at any time on a 3-month extension unpaid for. And that's really what we should have done 2 weeks ago, so that during this 3-month period we can continue working on a long-term solution. We must take up this short-term continuing resolution, which, by the way, is bipartisan. Senator Heller from Nevada joined with Senator Reid of Rhode Island, the 2 states that lead the nation in unemployment. The economy can't afford another manufacturing crisis over whether the United States government will stay open for business or pay its bills. But soon Republicans will be faced with the same choice: put their middle-class constituents first or keep playing political games. I received a letter this week from a Nevadan. By the way, Mr. President, a lifelong Republican from Nevada. And here's what he did and what he said. After 13 years at a job he loved, this 54-year-old man was laid off through no fault of his own and hasn't been able to find work for 10 months despite having applied to dozens and dozens of jobs. He's appalled at the way his own party has treated him and other unemployed Americans. This is what he wrote, and I quote, "I'm shocked and dismayed and outraged at what the Republicans have dealt with this matter." Let me read this again. "I'm shocked and dismayed and outraged at how Republicans have dealt with this matter. Republican leadership has talked about people like me as if we're thieves, not worthy of help. That will cost Republicans their jobs and should cost them their jobs." Close quote. This Nevadan is not alone. People all over America feel the same way. Republicans around the country support an extension of unemployment benefits.
Would the Majority Leader yield for a question?
Sure.
I'd like to ask the Majority Leader through the Chair for clarity. Is the Senate Republican filibuster holding up unemployment benefits for 1.3 million Americans?
It's actually now up to about 1.5 million.
Again, addressing the Majority Leader through the Chair. So the refusal of the Senate Republicans to allow us to vote on the extension of unemployment benefits is denying on average about $300 a week to 1.4 or 1.5 million Americans. Is that a fact?
That is true, Mr. President.
I'd like to ask the Majority Leader this question. Is it not true that the initial complaint of the Senate Republicans was that this payment of unemployment benefits was not paid for?
That is true.
Is it also true that the Democrats came up with a pay-for that would have paid for the unemployment benefits as the Republicans requested?
And a pay-for that was originally discovered by Paul Ryan.
I'd like to ask the Majority Leader, after the Democrats came up with the pay-for, the first demand of the Senate Republicans to stop their filibuster, did the Senate Republicans then join us in calling this measure for passage?
My friend, repeat the question.
After we came up with the pay-for, which the Senate Republicans insisted on, did they stop their Senate Republican filibuster on unemployment benefits and allow us to move forward?
No.
I'd like to ask the Majority Leader if this followed. It was my understanding that the Senate Republicans then came up with a new demand, and the demand was that they be allowed to offer amendments to the unemployment insurance benefit package before they would drop their Senate Republican filibuster that was stopping unemployment benefits for 1.4 million Americans?
That is true, and the biggest advocate we had for that on this side of the aisle was the whip, the senior senator from Illinois.
I'd like to ask the Majority Leader this question. Is it not true yesterday that in response to this Republican demand that you offered a unanimous consent request which would have given, in fact, up to 10 amendments on each side of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans, to this measure, and that the Democrats did not specify what the amendments would be, that it was really the decision of the Republicans to offer those amendments. Did the Senate Majority Leader offer that to the Senate Republicans so that they would stop their filibuster of unemployment benefits?
The answer is yes, and in addition to that, there would be available on each side, if they wanted, 5 side-by-sides, as we call them here, so that could be a total of 10 amendments
Now,
on each side, so 20.
so the Senate Republicans insisted on a pay-for. The Senate Democrats provided it. The Senate Republicans still refused to stop their filibuster. Then the Senate Republicans insisted on amendments. We offered up to 10 amendments on each side. Can the Senate Majority Leader say, after offering that unanimous consent, did the Republicans agree to it and stop their filibuster of unemployment benefits?
Sorry to say they did not.
I would ask the Majority Leader at this point in time, what are we waiting for? What are the Senate Republicans now demanding to stop their filibuster of providing unemployment benefits to 1.4 million people across America?
I have no idea.
I would say to the Senate Majority Leader, it strikes me as unfair, if not cruel, that we are holding 1.4 million unemployed Americans hostage to this continued political negotiation where each day the Republicans come up with a new demand before they'll stop their Senate Republican filibuster. I would ask the senator from Nevada, our Majority Leader, does he believe that a majority of the members of the United States Senate would vote for the extension of unemployment benefits to these 1.4 million Americans if the Senate Republicans would drop their filibuster?
Oh, no question about that. Absolutely.
Thank you,
yes.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, finally, let me just say that the man from Nevada is not alone. There are 1.5 million people just like him in this country. Sadly, that number will grow every week that Congress fails to act. And my Republican colleagues denigrate or ignore these hardworking Americans at their own political peril. Note the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Mr. President,
Republican Leader.
I ask that further proceedings on the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Let me just say in response to the colloquy we just heard, it used to be the Assistant Majority Leader's view that, as he put it, if you don't want to fight fires, don't become a firefighter, and if you don't want to cast tough votes, don't come to the Senate. Obviously, those days have changed, and what really happened over the last week is the refusal to have an open amendment process, the refusal to treat both sides the same. The final proposal we objected to yesterday required all the amendments to get 60 votes, but final passage only 51. Still does not restore the Senate to the way it's formally functioned. Any member of the Senate ought to be able to have a fair chance to get his or her amendment adopted. That's the way it used to be around here before the Majority Leader decided to dictate everything everyone does. And so what we're seeking here is fundamental fairness, and on this particular bill, an open amendment process, an opportunity to pay for it. And I think the real concern was the Majority Leader was afraid that some of the Republican amendments might actually pass, might actually enjoy bipartisan support. So we'll get back to that bill. It's a very important bill. But if anybody had any doubts that Washington Democrats wanted to see the unemployment insurance bill fail, well, I think we just had those doubts erased yesterday and by the comments that were just made. It's just the latest example of Senate Democrats putting politics over policy. And in this case, it's doubly tragic because this time they're putting politics over struggling families who deserve some certainty from Congress. Look, it is no secret that our Democratic friends plan to spend the year exploiting folks who are still struggling in this economy for political gain. They've been telling reporters that for weeks. This is no secret. But that doesn't make it any less disturbing. It's still wrong. I'd probably want to be talking about something other than Obamacare, too, if I'd voted for it. They want to talk about anything other than Obamacare. But to create a conflict where the possibility of agreement was so close, while more than 1 million people are stuck in the middle, is just simply outrageous. Making pawns out of these people stuck in the middle of this political game. And here's the larger issue. Here we are in the 6th year of this administration, and we're still talking about emergency unemployment benefits 6 years into the Obama administration, after all the stimulus bills and all the other big government solutions that we were told would help the little guy. We're still looking at record long-term unemployment. We're still looking at hundreds of thousands of able-bodied men and women basically giving up on finding work in this economy last month alone, in just 1 month. One report I saw even suggested about half of our nation's counties have yet to return to their pre-recession economic output, half the counties in America. Bottom line, the Obama economy just isn't working for middle-class Americans. Now, Democrats tell us again and again and again that their policies will help people who are struggling, and yet we always seem to end up in the very same situation, debating whether or not to provide more emergency help instead of talking about how to provide a long-term solution and a stable economy that doesn't require permanent life support from Washington. So what's needed here is a fundamental course correction. What's needed is for our colleagues to finally acknowledge what's failed and then actually work with us on the underlying problems. That's what Republicans are saying in this debate. What we're saying is, how about actually trying to create jobs for a change? That will be the President's challenge today when he speaks in North Carolina. We hear he might lay out some ideas to get the private sector moving again. If that's the case, then maybe he'll be taking a step in the right direction, a step away from big government policies that have failed so many Americans for so many years. Because if he's truly serious about getting the economy back on track and creating jobs, he'll do more than just talk about job creation or bipartisanship today. He'll actually work with us on real bipartisan solutions to get there. And there are simple ways he can show he means it. The Republican-controlled House has sent over a number of bills that would give a boost to jobs and to our economy. A good start would be for the President to lean on Democrats who run the Senate to take up those for immediate consideration. He could acknowledge that the real pain that Obamacare is inflicting on middle-class families, and then work with us to start over with real bipartisan reforms that actually lower costs and won't hurt the economy the way Obamacare does. He could call for a true bipartisan tax reform. He could announce construction of the Keystone Pipeline. I mean, he came to a lunch with Senate Republicans. I see the senator from Pennsylvania on the floor. He'll remember this. Came to a lunch of Senate Republicans last year, and the President said he would make a decision on the Keystone Pipeline last year, sometime during 2013. Apparently that was in the same category. If you have your policy and you like it, you can keep it. You have your doctor and you like it, you can keep it. I'll make a decision on the Keystone Pipeline by the end of 2013. Well, we're still waiting. He could actually deliver on one of the brightest spots of his economic agenda, trade. That means instead of allowing the U.S. to lag behind our trading partners, the President could find a way to bring his party on board with a bipartisan bill introduced last week that would get the administration back in the game of helping American workers with increased exports. These are just a few of the many areas where we could work together to get some good things done for the American people. So I hope he'll be serious in his speech today. I hope he'll focus on actually getting the job done instead of just providing another distraction from the pain of Obamacare and the Obama economy. Because if this devolves into just another political exercise that's focused more on making a point than making a real difference in the lives of people who are struggling, well, that's not going to help middle-class families get back on their feet. That won't help college graduates find full-time work. And all it would do is continue a cycle of economic pain that the President needs to work with Republicans to stop. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the time between 12 noon will be equal, the time until 12 noon will be equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, and with senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each.
Mr. President.
The senator from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to address this situation we find ourselves in on the unemployment bill. And I have to say, this most recent episode in which the majority leader refuses to permit an open process, refuses to allow debate, refuses to allow kinds of amendments that Republicans would like to offer to improve this bill is very disturbing and part of a very well-established trend now. It's actually shocking to me that over the last 6 months, since July of last year through today, this body has voted on a grand total of 4 Republican amendments. 4 recorded votes on Republican amendments in 6 months. Under every previous majority leader, under every previous majority, the Senate didn't work this way. I mean, it would be routine to have 4 votes in a morning before we broke for lunch. We've had 4 votes on our ideas that have been permitted in 6 months. So we are systematically being shut out of the process. And what's particularly maddening about this is that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle know full well that the votes are there to pass an extension of unemployment insurance. They know it. If they would allow an open amendment process, we'd have a few amendments, we'd have a debate, we'd have some votes, and in the course of maybe an afternoon, maybe 2, we would have finished up last week and we would have passed an extension of unemployment benefits. But evidently, that's not the goal of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, so they insisted on making sure that we could not engage in this debate, offer the amendments, and do this in a way that's consistent with what the American people want us to do, which is move forward in the most sensible way possible. Now, I've got an example this morning of the kind of very modest reform that we would like. As for myself, I think we should extend unemployment benefits for certain Americans who are in the really tough circumstances they find themselves in, provided that the cost of doing so is properly offset with a legitimate offset so that we don't simply add still more to our excessive deficit and debt, and that we have some modest reforms, so we begin the process of fixing a program that doesn't work. If this were working, then why are there so many Americans who are unemployed for such long periods of time? Clearly this program's not working. So let me give one example of an amendment that I think most Pennsylvanians think is common sense. It's an amendment that Senator Coburn offered, and it would simply end federal unemployment benefits for people who have income of over $1 million a year. My guess is most Pennsylvanians are shocked to discover that we extend unemployment benefits to millionaires. And I'm not talking about a net worth of $1 million, someone who maybe has a farm that's on paper worth $1 million, but they might have no income. No, I'm talking about people who actually have earned income of over $1 million, and then they stop working and start collecting unemployment benefits. I think most people think that's ridiculous. And it's not as isolated as you may think. In 2011, there were over 3,200 households that reported income of over $1 million, and yet they were paid $30 million in unemployment benefits. In fact, there were over 100 households that had income of over $5 million. And taxpayers are paying them unemployment benefits? I mean, this just doesn't make sense. And it doesn't make sense to members of this body. In April of 2011, the Senate had a vote on the substance of this very amendment, ending unemployment benefits for millionaires and multimillionaires. And the vote was 100 to 0. in favor of making this little modest reform to this program. Now, if we did actually enact this reform, it'd save about $300 million over 10 years, which could go to paying for the benefits for the people who actually need an extended unemployment insurance. So of all of the members of the Senate who are here today and were here at the time of this vote in 2011, and that's the vast majority, everyone agreed. There's no dissent on this. They're bipartisan co-sponsors of this amendment, Democratic and Republican alike, who recognize that this is just common sense. So despite the fact that this is not controversial, that it is germane and relevant, that it is a modest reform that makes sense and would save money and would free up resources to pay unemployment benefits for the people who really need it, despite all of those facts, we're blocked. We're not allowed to offer this amendment on the Senate floor. Now, we attempted yesterday, the minority leader, the senior senator from Kentucky, asked unanimous consent to offer this amendment, and that consent was denied. So then he moved to table or to eliminate, if you will, the amendments that the majority leader uses to block our opportunities to offer our own, his blocking amendments, and the majority party defeated that attempt to do away with those blocking amendments. So as we sit here this morning, the majority leader continues to block our opportunity to offer any amendments, even a modest common sense amendment with bipartisan support that passed this body 100-0. So, Madam President, I'm going to make one more attempt to offer this amendment. Because I can't for the life of me understand why we can't have a vote on this little bit of common sense. So I rise to offer the Coburn Amendment, number 2606 to S. 1845.
As the motion to proceed to S. 1846 is the pending question.
Madam President, I move to appeal the ruling of the chair that the Coburn Amendment is not in order.
The appeal is debatable.
And I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Madam President,
Senator from Louisiana.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the quorum call, please.
Without objection.
Thank you. Madam President, I come to the floor this morning to talk about another very important bill. There was an hour exchange about unemployment, which is extremely important for the nation, and I think people got to hear arguments on both sides, and they can continue to try to process that. But I came to the floor this morning to talk about another very important piece of legislation that we do have very deep and very genuine bipartisan support for, and that is the flood insurance provisions, the Homeowner Affordability Act, which will correct some of the more egregious provisions of a bill that passed a year and a half ago called Biggert Waters. The bill, Biggert Waters, that was passed, named for the two members of the House that led that effort, were well-intentioned. In fact, I've had many wonderful conversations with Maxine Waters, the absolutely distinguished congresswoman from California, whose name carries that bill. And she had wonderful intentions because California, like Louisiana, depends on a program to work that's sustainable, that's affordable. But she even recognized and has been so gracious in her time to come to Louisiana and say, you know, we intended for this to fix the problem, but I will admit we made it worse, and the way that FEMA has interpreted some of the things that we've done have made it worse, and the fact that the federal government continues, despite our efforts, to recognize levees that people have built. So she has agreed to help lead our effort to reform a bill that she and Congresswoman Judy Biggert passed a year and a half ago. So I want to start by commending the leadership. In the House, the leadership is being led by Congresswoman Waters and Congressman Grimm, and there are chairmen of standing committees that are working with them as we speak to figure out how to move forward in the House. But in the Senate, we have been working so well together despite all of the commotion and adversarial positions on other issues. We've put together a very excellent coalition of about 200 organizations, and I'm going to read those names in just a minute. 200 organizations that have been working with us to fashion a reform bill that meets these objectives. And Madam President, you have spoken on the floor of the Senate now at least a half a dozen times that I have listened to you speak on the floor, so you know all this that I'm going to say because you said it even better than I can. But the provisions that are in our reform bill for flood insurance meet important goals. First of all, it's affordable to the middle-class people that are required to have it. That's the most important thing about flood insurance, is that it be affordable to the people required to have it. Yes, there are some very wealthy families that live in mansions on beaches that are required to have it. They will have no problem paying a substantial premium. But there are millions of middle-class families, many of them in Louisiana, that don't live anywhere near the water, and they most certainly do not live in mansions on the beach. They live in middle-class, blue-collar, working neighborhoods far from lakes, a distance from rivers and nowhere near the ocean, that have found themselves caught up in paying premiums that they can't afford. So if we don't fix this, the premiums coming into the program will be less and less. People will be defaulting on homes. Banks, communities will take a downward economic spiral, and the program itself will collapse. Now, we can't have this program collapse. So even though our critics say, and this has been in the newspapers, they say that we're trying to saddle taxpayers with a huge debt, nothing could be further from the truth. We're trying to save taxpayers from a big bailout by reforming a program that needs to be reformed and fixed so that middle-class people can afford it, banks can operate well with it, home builders can build homes with it, realtors can sell the homes with the program, which they aren't able to do now. Everyone can get back to work, anxiety can be reduced, and give us some time to figure out how to reach those two important goals. So the taxpayers don't have to bail us out, and homeowners and businesses can afford it. Is that too much to ask? I don't think so. And happily, Senator Menendez and Senator Isaacson, two really veteran leaders of the Senate, have put a very good bill together, and we are ready to vote. We're ready to vote, Madam President. We could vote actually right now if we could just get a few things worked out. And I'd like to talk about what those few things are publicly so that people can start working them out. Because I think the more things that are transparent around here, the better we all are, and things that are done in secret, it's usually problematic. So let me say from the many people following this that the base bill is still basically in the order that everyone understands it to be. It's printed, it's been visible, public for weeks now. That bill that is the basic essence of the compromises worked out by Senator Menendez and Senator Isaacson, and I might say with Senator Merkley's extraordinary leadership as a subcommittee chair. That is the base bill. There are amendments that people want to offer. Happily, they're all related to flood. And to my knowledge, and Senator Isaacson has worked through this as I have and Senator Menendez, there's a Hagan provision about escrow requirements that we think we should vote on, and we're not sure how that vote will turn out, but we're happy to vote on it. There is a blunt amendment that the National Home Builders have suggested that we have an amendment on, and we could vote on that as well. There is a CRAPO amendment that's in the works. Some of these amendments have been filed and have language. Some of them are just in theory form. There's a CRAPO amendment that would adjust the rate increases in the underlying bill. We could vote on that. There's a Reed amendment from Rhode Island. This would require FEMA to conduct a study on the viability of offering community-based flood insurance policies. My notes say there's broad support for that. There's a Colburn amendment, which is an alternative to the NARAB. That amendment will probably not receive the votes required, but we're happy to talk about his amendment and have him offer it. And there is a Merkley amendment that will subject NFIB policyholders to be forced to place insurance policies and let their policies lapse. It's a technical amendment. And there's also a Rubio-Nelson amendment that's being discussed. Now, those are the only amendments that we know about. So if there's anybody else that has an amendment on flood that would like to offer it or have it considered, the next couple hours would be the last opportunity to get those amendments in. Now, I know everybody's busy. Everybody's got lots to do. I've cleared my calendar. I had meetings, cleared the calendar to do this today because it's very important that we not just get so busy with other things that we leave this place and not get this done. So we're working transparently, openly, so there are no games to be played by either side here. So again, I want to repeat, there's a Hagan amendment pending, not pending, but that we know of, a Rubio-Nelson, a Reed of Rhode Island, a Colburn, a Merkley, a Blunt, and then Toomey, who was just on the floor, the senator from Pennsylvania, has indicated that he wants to offer a substitute to what we're proposing. I'm not the manager of this bill, so it is not my authority to make these definitive statements. Senator Menendez and Senator Isaacson will ultimately decide the strategy. But as far as I understand, because we've all been working very hard together to move this bill to final passage here, as far as I understand, these are the only amendments that people would like to offer, and there doesn't seem to be any objection to offering them. In addition, if people want 51 votes or if they want 60 votes, we're very open to that as well. And we could pass the bill with 51 votes. We can pass the bill with 60 votes. So we're open, you know, because that's the game that's played here. You say, well, we want 60. No, we want 51 or 51 and 60. We can take it in any arithmetic anybody wants to give us. You want us 51 votes, we will deliver them. You want 60 votes, we can deliver 60 votes. Because we've done the homework on this bill, working with coalitions, working with homeowners and businesses from South Dakota, North Dakota, to New Jersey and New York, to Mississippi, Louisiana, and California and Oregon. There is no disagreement. Well, there's some disagreement, but there's not enough disagreement to overcome the great coalition that has been put together here, which was evidenced by an extraordinary press conference just a couple of days ago where we had over, you know, almost 20 senators showed up or their staffs were represented saying we're ready to go. So my message on the floor today, and if I have, I don't know how many more minutes I have.
Senator's used 12 minutes.
Senator has used 12 minutes.
Okay, I'd like another 5, unanimous consent.
Without objection.
Okay. What was evidenced earlier, and the coalition knows this, is that there's broad consensus. There are a few senators that want to vote against this bill. There are a few senators that want to offer amendments. Fine. Let the record show these amendments could be offered. These amendments, germane to this bill, and any that would come to us, you know, in the next, you know, hour or so that are germane to this bill, we can take these amendments and have a 51 vote, a 60 requirement vote, and final passage on 51 or 60. Let's just get this done. And there should be no confusion at all about this. And I'm glad that no one on the opposite side is here debating me on this. That's a good sign for us that there really is only one side to this story, and this is the side. I'm trying to be as fair as I can. I have named the people who have amendments to our knowledge. We, the Democrats, have said we have no objection to you offering those amendments. If you want 51 votes, if you want 60 votes, just let us know. I feel confident that our coalition can hold against any amendments that would try to gut this bill. And we will let people know what those amendments are and who's offered them. Because we think that this is absolutely the right thing to do for the country, for our states that we're representing, and for the taxpayer. And just give us a little time to work together to figure out how to strengthen the National Flood Insurance Program without bankrupting 5 million families. Because if we don't stop this train that has already left the station, we have to stop it, reverse it, and put it back in the train barn. And it is going down the track pretty fast. This is not a good place to be. As I said, we probably should never have passed this bill, but it was put in a conference committee report that was unamendable. And some provisions of it were indecipherable at the time. That's a little strong of a word, but they were not understood. Not indecipherable, but they were not well understood. As the bill got read and implemented, people started realizing, oh my gosh, what have we done? This is not going to work. And they are right. So I'm going to stay on the floor this morning. If anyone from the Republican side wants to come down, anyone, and disagree with what I've presented or challenge what I've presented, please do, because I want this to be a very open process. There's nothing for us to hide from. And that's what a democracy is about. There's some people that want to vote against our bill. Fine, go ahead and vote against it. But we have the votes to pass it. We have 60, as I said. We may even have more than 60. And if we don't, then all I can say is we've tried our level best, and we just don't have the votes to correct it. I don't think that's the case. So I am not going to allow the smoke that's around here and the confusion and all the hot air to confuse the coalition that's worked too hard. And they need to hear my voice very clearly, which is why I'm here. There is clarity. There is no opposition on the Democratic side to this bill. We are waiting for a few clarifications from the Republican side. We hope to get those, and the Democrats that do have amendments, the only Democrats that have amendments that I know of are Senator Hagan, Senator Reid from Rhode Island, and Senator Merkley. We have no objection on the Democratic side for this bill, and only 3 members that have amendments, and we're happy to have a vote on those amendments. They're not really controversial. Somebody might find a problem with them and might vote no, fine, but they don't gut the bill. There's no problem with the bill. It's the Republican side that we're waiting for clarity. And again, I know how busy everyone is. I know the senator from Pennsylvania is working very hard on he was just here speaking about it, on the unemployment insurance, and I know that's a very, very important issue to the people that he represents and to Louisiana. If he could get a little time to work on this amendment that we think he wants to offer on flood whenever he can, we're happy to have his amendment. We will vote on it, and Menendez and Isaacson will decide on when and how and what the number is, 51 or 60, but I believe, let me just speak for myself, that it doesn't matter we have the votes to not allow, if his intention is to gut the bill will not be gutted. If his intention is to help us strengthen the bill, then that is a definite possibility. But people are desperate to get an answer from Congress now. We should have done this 4 months ago before these rate increases. Escrow accounts are being collected now from people that got bills that they were paying $500 a year. Now they're paying $5,000. According to the Biggert-Waters law, the banks have to go get that $5,000 and put it in the bank now to pay that insurance. That is a real hardship on people. We need to stop that, figure this out, and I'll finally add, I'm going to ask for another 1 minute. I think I've extended my time already. Another 1 minute. Thank you. We've delayed this fix too long, and we need to go ahead and take care of this. So I'm going to stay on the floor this morning. I'll periodically bring everyone up to date. Let me just close with reminding people, let me do the dot map, with reminding people what we are talking about. These are the new flood maps in the United States that are either in effect, purple, proposed in green, and new flood maps in yellow. There is not a state that is exempt from what I'm speaking about. And the amazing thing is to see this cluster in Pennsylvania and in New York and in Ohio. I mean, everyone thinks about this as a Texas or Florida or Louisiana issue. But when you see the inland states as well being affected by flood maps that have never been issued before or being issued without good data, because FEMA doesn't have the science or technology or resources to do this correctly yet. The affordability study has not even been done, and they just didn't do it, even though the last bill asked them to. So we need to put this train back in the station. It is not ready for prime time. And then bring it out in a way that, yes, rates may have to rise. No one is opposed to that. But they have to rise in a way that people can afford them, people can be notified, and then other things can be taken into consideration, like from our standpoint, Louisiana would like levees recognized. Since we've spent billions of dollars of taxpayer money building them, we'd like them to be recognized. So if you're behind a levee, you don't have to pay $15,000 a year because you've already paid for the levee. You don't pay twice. Taxpayers shouldn't have to pay 3 times. They're happy to pay their fair share. Most everybody I know is happy to pay their fair share. But under Biggert-Waters, it's not fair and it's not shared. And it's got to be, pushed back, not completely repealed, but delayed, which is what our bill does until we can fix it. So, Madam President, I'm just going to stay down here, and if someone else comes to the floor, that's fine, and I'll talk again about this because it's really important for us to get this done. And I know we have a big appropriations bill. I'm an appropriator. I'm the chair of the Homeland Security. It's a big, important bill for the country. But this bill is almost as important, not as the whole appropriations bill, don't get me wrong, but for the 5 million people that they're getting ready to lose their homes or the businesses, it's really important to them. And it's important for us since there doesn't seem to be any real serious objection to work hard to get it done. I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. Madam President.
Senator from Louisiana.
I want to ask unanimous consent to dispense with the quorum call.
Without objection.
And then I'd like to ask us to go back into quorum call by unanimous consent, but to divide the time equally between the Republicans and the Democrats.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Well, senators have been offering general speeches this morning. That'll last until 12 noon when they'll take up a short-term funding bill to keep the government operating through Saturday. Current funding runs out tonight. Later today, we could see more on federal spending for this fiscal year. President Obama is out of town for a short visit today. He is heading to Raleigh, North Carolina for an event dealing with the economy. We will have live coverage of the president's remarks this afternoon on C-SPAN 3. It'll start at 1 p.m. Eastern. Later today, the president will return to the White House. He's expected to meet with Senate Democrats on the Senate agenda and his plans for dealing with Congress and his strategy for keeping the Senate during the political season. If there are remarks from lawmakers after the meeting, we will have them for you on the C-SPAN networks. While we wait for further floor action here in the Senate, comments this morning from Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley on the federal budget and government surveillance programs.
We want to welcome back to our table Senator Chuck Grassley, Republican of Iowa. Sir, you are the ranking Republican on the Senate Judiciary Committee. Yesterday, you heard from the president's task force that he put together on reforms to the NSA's surveillance programs. I want to share with you the front page of the New York Times this morning. Peter Baker and Charlie Savage have some details about the president's speech that he's going to give on Friday. Says this: Mr. Obama plans to increase limits on access to bulk telephone data, call for privacy safeguards for foreigners, and propose the creation of a public advocate to represent privacy concerns at a secret intelligence court.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I think, first of all, more access is very legitimate, because I think transparency and more oversight by Congress is very important. And if there had been more of that, I don't think we'd have the uproar now from the grassroots when Snowden made his made public. Now, two things that you mentioned the president might come up with: public advocacy under certain circumstances would be appropriate. If it's in every instance, I think that there might be some concerns about that. And I don't quite understand, when the Constitution doesn't protect foreigners, what the concern is there about limitations on foreigners, because we want to assume that everybody in the United States is not going to be a terrorist against our country. But a lot of people outside the United States, quite obviously, want to hurt us. Now, there's something left out of there that I have a very strong feeling that, based upon meetings that several of us had with the president last week at the White House, that the president is going to be very strong in support of what we call the 215 program, which is metadata. But not necessarily the way it is right now at NSA under the government. The president didn't make clear what he was. Was it going to stay with the telephone companies, or was it going to go to a third party where we would have access for it if we needed it? But he was very, very strong in his statements to us about the importance of metadata.
About collecting.
Yeah.
And so how they collect it and how much they collect, do you think that stays in place?
I believe that would be unchanged. The question is, where is it going to be stored, and what access would we have to it? You know, when you have concerns about privacy in government, they're legitimate, because the government has abused some privacy. You see it right now through the IRS and conservative organizations, as an example, and that's not even intelligence. But when you have Target and the other one,
right, the security breach at Target.
Yeah, and then there's another one too. I forgot the name of it. But anyway, you know, then if you're going to put it in the private sector, it seems to me that a lot of private sector organizations know more about what we do, particularly from a commercial standpoint, than what the government knows about us.
So Peter Baker and Charlie Savage report this, that President Obama will not endorse leaving bulk data in the custody of telecommunications firms, nor will he require court permission for all so-called national security letters seeking business records. Can you explain this a little bit?
Yeah. I think the national security letters was not even something that was given to the review committee to make recommendations on, and I'm a little surprised they made those recommendations. But we have had the FBI before our Judiciary Committee, and we've had a chance to ask FBI Director Comey about what if we followed the directions of the review committee, and evidently the President agrees with the FBI Director, it would inhibit our opportunity to go after terrorists, and might even put more requirements on going after terrorists than you would even before a grand jury for a common criminal in the United States. What was the other point that you asked me about?
He said, nor will he require court permission for all so-called national security letters. You just addressed that.
Yeah.
But he will not endorse leaving bulk data in the custody of telecommunications firms.
Well, see, that's kind of along the lines, I don't know why he's making, might make that recommendation. And by the way, I think we all want to wait till the President makes his statement before we react to it. But anyway, I think that that gets back to some of the concerns that I just said that I have that would target being breached and everything, and 70 million people in America having some of their, at least their financial stuff divulged to other people and be used for fraudulent purposes. I wonder if that's maybe more privacy concerns there than if the government controls it.
Well, a little bit more from the New York Times, because they say this, that instead of taking the storage of bulk data out of government hands, as his task force recommended, Mr. Obama will leave it in place for now and ask you all, lawmakers, to weigh in. So
Yeah.
what will you say?
Well, you know, we should have started out the conversation with what I'm going to say now. We're just in the process of Congress trying to do in a bipartisan way. This will have to be done in a bipartisan way, trying to find a balance between the constitutional protection of privacy, which is very, very important, and also very, very important, the #1 responsibility of the federal government for the national security. You've got to find that balance, and that's what we're going to balance. There is very general agreement on more transparency and more oversight. But beyond that, I don't know whether anybody, Republican or Democrat, knows exactly where you want to come out, except there's a few that think you ought to do away with the whole program, and then there's a few over here that said there should never be any changes.
So are you on board with the legislation drafted by your chairman, Senator Patrick Leahy, and Jim Sensenbrenner, Republican from Wisconsin, over in the House?
The answer to that is no. I'm not on any piece of legislation at this point because I have not found in my own mind, and I have a responsibility to go to other people in my political party and work across party lines as ranking Republican. I want to find that middle ground. But I want to tell you, even the middle ground can tend to be controversial when you have extreme views over here and well thought out views over here.
All right. Well, we covered the hearing yesterday before the Senate Judiciary Committee with members of President Obama's task force that he put together last year to come up with recommendations of what to do over the NSA data collection program. So if you're interested, go to cspan.org. You can watch it there. Before we get to phone calls, Senator, let me move to the $1 trillion spending legislation. How do you plan to vote?
I'm probably going to vote for it. I have not gone through the 1,500 pages yet.
Will you before you vote?
Oh, of course. Well, listen, let me say that appropriation bills don't come out. Well, the final bill comes out maybe 3 days before you're going to vote. But remember, we've been working on this over a long period of time, and not everything is new. One of the things I want to make sure that there's no earmarks in it. If there's earmarks in it, because both political parties, as a result of the 2010 election, decided no more earmarks. And there better not be any earmarks in it. That might be a reason to vote against it. If it stays within the budget that was adopted before Christmas, that's voting for it. But maybe I better reserve judgment until you get through all parts of it. But it's pretty much a fairly conservative budget, even though people in the House of Representatives would say it spends maybe this year 35 or 40 billion more than what was in the sequestration. But a lot of people...
That it is in a quorum call.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Madam President, I just had a conversation with the